Hi guys, today I'm going to be testing out Crayola watercolors. The reason why I'm testing them out is because they're more of a cheaper brand, so I want to see if they would work well. I'm going to start off by swatching Crayola watercolors first, and then my Artist Loft and Artist watercolors. Something I noticed very quickly was that when I first started out testing the watercolors, the pigment ended up sticking onto my brush even after I cleaned it, so to avoid further damage, I used a different brush. I was actually surprised as I started swatching the Crayola watercolors because I kind of expected them not to go on very well, but they actually turned out to be pretty vibrant. Since swatching watercolors is pretty much a tedious process, at least for me, I'm going to skip ahead to when I'm swatching my other colors. So the next brand I'm using is Artist Loft and Artist Watercolor. They are in tubes, so the difference between the Crayola watercolors and these ones are that I can squeeze the watercolor pigment out of the tubes and I can basically let them dry in my palette and reactivate them whenever I want. And since they're about the same quality, that's the reason why I put them in the same container. Now, I'm not saying that Artist Loft or Artist Watercolor is the best brand, but I am saying that I think it's pretty good for practice if you ever just want to practice trying to get better or trying to use techniques. The brand I recommend the most is Van Gogh, but if you are on a budget, I would probably purchase Artist Loft or Artist Watercolor because Van Gogh, just one half well, will cost $4. Now you'll see here that the colors I'm swatching, some of them might not be the exact same as the Crayola watercolors I swatched previously, just because I couldn't find the exact same color in my tube of watercolors. So, yeah. Here is the overall result of all of them swatched, and I'm pretty surprised. Crayola isn't as vibrant as my other watercolors, but they're still pretty good. When I first opened the palette, the first thing I noticed was that the colors were kind of waxy, so I wasn't sure what to expect. But overall, I think these are pretty good watercolors, even for their price. But the brush that came with the set was kind of bad. It was a bit dinky, but other than that, the set's pretty good. So the first thing I'm going to do is test and see how the colors blend. One thing I did notice was that the colors didn't show up as well as the red. Like the orange and the yellow, it kind of blended out, and yes, watercolors are supposed to be transparent, but it was almost, I couldn't even see the color really, except for red. So that's one thing that I would say is a problem. But other than that, I think it blended out pretty well. I think if I added a bit more pigment to my brush, I could have gotten the darker colors like I wanted. Eventually, I did decide that I wanted to add some trees with some black paint. Unfortunately, I forgot that the page was still wet, so it ended up muddying the colors a bit. So for this, I'm just going to take into account how it blended, not how it works with fine detail. I will admit, I was kind of rushing a bit on these paintings, not specifically Crayola. I wasn't trying to make Crayola look bad. I was just rushing in general, just because I am very short on time at the moment, so I promise my art's not that bad. Since the trees did not end up looking as good as I wanted them to be and ended up muddying up, I'm just going to skip that part and just go to the next page and compare how the other page blended out. Something I noticed right away when I was painting on the other page with the different watercolors was that the pigments were a lot darker, a lot more vibrant, and I could definitely see all three colors, not just specifically the red. Anyway, I'm just going to describe this technique I'm using. It's called the wet on wet technique, where basically you wet the paper and then put the watercolors on top. As I'm showing you how these watercolors blend out, I'm going to give you my overall opinion of Crayola watercolors with blending. I think they did blend out pretty good overall. I just think that since the colors weren't exactly as vibrant as the colors I was using earlier, I think that I should use more pigment if I do want a darker or a brighter kind of color. But other than that, they are pretty good considering the price they are. Now, would I recommend them to anyone who was looking into doing watercolors? I would say if you're doing it as a hobby or if you're just doing it to try to figure out and learn with watercolors, I would say yes. I think you could learn with Crayolas, but I do recommend in the future, if you do end up deciding you like watercolors, to go upgrade to Artist Watercolor or even Van Gogh. Now here you can definitely see how these pigments are a lot darker or brighter per se. I can definitely see the orange, and I can definitely see the yellow. Now I'm just going to skip over and just show the overall results comparing the two paintings. Now please ignore the trees and the electric pole. I do realize that the colors kind of muddied up and blurred a little bit. That's my fault on my part because I forgot to let the whole page dry. Once again, I will say that I think both palettes blended out really good, but I was just fairly disappointed that the Crayola watercolors, they just were really transparent and I could barely see the other colors. Now, the last thing I'm going to do to compare the two brands is I'm going to be painting a beach landscape with watercolors. How I'm going to start off is I'm going to be drawing the basic scene with my pencil. I just cut it off the video just for time's sake. And after I let the colors dry, I'm going to outline the whole picture with fine liner pen. And what this does is that it brings more texture to the painting, and I like the way it looks. What I'm hoping to achieve with this landscape is that if I use fine liner pen, maybe I can fix the problem of the colors muddying up a bit. Now, I'm sorry this isn't a whole tutorial, but this is pretty straightforward. I think you could paint a landscape like this by yourself. Now, you can use any colors you want. For example, I'm kind of doing, let's say a sunset almost. What if you want your sunset with purple or pinks, or even just something very pretty but not really the colors of a sunset? You can paint that too. I'm just doing a basic outline, and with the limited palette I have of Crayola watercolors, I can only do pretty much regular colors. Now with this painting, I'm not going to be trying to make it perfect. It's going to be pretty loose because the pen pretty much does all the work. You don't really need to make it perfect. You don't even have to blend it too much. The fine liner pen really sucks the attention of the person, and personally, I really think that any person could do a watercolor painting like this. And I've got to say, I'm pretty impressed with Crayola. I think that, personally, I think with or without Van Gogh, I think that anyone could do a watercolor painting as beautiful as this, even with Crayolas. So I've got to say, I think overall Crayolas aren't as bad as people think just because of how cheap they are. Now, I still would recommend, if you're going to be taking watercolor seriously, eventually upgrading to a higher quality of watercolor like Van Gogh, but I do think this is very good for beginner. Now that I'm done with this painting, I'm going to repeat the exact same process on my next painting using the exact colors, or at least the very similar colors that I can use. Now, I sped this up a significant amount just because you already saw the process of how I painted it, and I am very short on time. I do notice a really big difference between the two colors, vibrancy and brightness wise, but I kind of like the way it looks on both paintings. On the first painting I did with the Crayola watercolors, it makes it look almost as if it's kind of a cloudy but still kind of sunny day, just because of how, I'm not going to say dull, but not as bright the colors are compared to the colors I'm using currently. With the colors I'm using currently, it looks like it's really bright, like almost in the middle of the day or maybe in the afternoon. I will say one more downfall of Crayola is that it's going to be harder to get a variety of colors, just because it's a bit harder to mix the colors, and with watercolor tubes you can get a variety of colors. With Crayola you can't really do that. Anyway, now I'm going to be outlining the picture with a Sharpie. The reason why I couldn't use my fine liner pen is I ran out of ink, and that kind of made me upset because that's my favorite fine liner pen and they're kind of expensive. But I will say that fine point Sharpies, they do work pretty good. They work really similar to a fine line pen. The only downfall is that you have to wait till the painting is completely dry so the colors don't bleed. With my fine point pen, since it's waterproof, it doesn't bleed, and it's a lot easier and a lot quicker to use. Alright, now that I'm done with this painting, I'm going to be moving on to the next painting and outlining it with Sharpie. There we go. Okay, I'd say we're pretty much done. Overall, I think you can tell my opinion on Crayolas. They're very mixed, but overall, pretty good. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and please like and subscribe to this video. It means a lot to me. I really hope that you took something from this, that you learned something new, and let me know in the comments down below what you personally think of Crayola watercolors.